Buenos Aires, May 1960. The city breathed in the slow rhythm of an autumn evening, the kind of dusk that turned the streets bronze under flickering lamps. Commuters stepped off buses, children chased stray dogs through alleys, and radios hummed faint tangos from open windows. On Garibaldi Street, nothing seemed extraordinary. But for one man, this would be the last ordinary night of his life. He stepped off bus 203 just after 7:40 p.m. He was in his mid-50s, slightly stooped, balding, his coat too large for his frame. He walked carefully, as if trying not to draw attention, clutching a worn leather briefcase filled with factory papers. His name, or at least the one on his identification, was Ricardo Klement. He lived quietly in a modest house in the suburb of San Fernando with his wife and sons. To his neighbors, he was a polite German immigrant, diligent, perhaps a little withdrawn. But to another world, the world that remembered trains and camps and ashes, he was not Ricardo Klement. He was Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Nazi deportation system, the man who had once organized the logistics of genocide. 15 years earlier, his signature had sealed the fates of millions. He had vanished after the war, escaping the chaos of Europe under forged papers and the protection of sympathetic networks. To many, he was presumed dead. To others, his survival was an open wound. And to Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service, he was unfinished business. On this particular evening, a black Chevrolet sat quietly by the side of the road. Inside, 3 men watched the bus stop from the shadows. They had waited there for weeks, memorizing every step of Eichmann's routine, his walk, his timing. The moment he crossed the street, the team's leader, Peter Malkin, kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, his heartbeat slow but deliberate. They were thousands of kilometers from home, operating without official cover, in a country that had no reason to protect them. If they failed, if they were caught, they would not just lose the mission, they could ignite a diplomatic crisis that might destroy the fragile reputation of Israel's young intelligence service. But tonight, there would be no failure. Not this time. As the man with the briefcase approached the dim stretch of Garibaldi Street, the agents tensed. Malkin stepped out, pretending to fix the car's engine, his head bowed, hands trembling not from fear, but from focus. The moment had arrived, the end of a manhunt that had taken 15 years. The ghost of the Holocaust was about to be pulled back into the light. To understand why Mossad had hunted this one man across oceans, you must return to the ruins of Europe in 1945. The war had ended, but justice had not yet begun. Cities were in ashes, concentration camps liberated but silent, and the full scope of the Nazi machine was only starting to surface. The Allies held the Nuremberg trials, executing many of the Reich's leaders, but others, thousands of others, vanished into the fog of post-war chaos. Adolf Eichmann was among them. During the war, he had been a lieutenant colonel in the SS, reporting directly to Reinhard Heydrich, the chief architect of the so-called final solution. Eichmann's specialty was logistics, the cold, mechanical art of moving human beings. He organized train timetables, coordinated deportations from every occupied territory, and ensured that cattle cars ran on schedule. His office in Berlin was the heart of the machinery that transformed ideology into mass death. After Germany's defeat, Eichmann fled under false names, moving through monasteries and safe houses used by former Nazis. In 1950, he obtained forged Red Cross documents and boarded a ship to Argentina, a country that welcomed thousands of fugitives from the Reich. There, under the name Ricardo Klement, he worked in a Mercedes-Benz factory, earning a modest salary. He grew a mustache, learned Spanish, and lived quietly in the suburbs. To the casual observer, he was just another displaced European trying to rebuild his life. But for the survivors, his absence was intolerable. The world had seen the photographs of the camps, but justice required names, and Eichmann's name had never faded. Survivors spoke of him as the man who sent their families east, the one who stood at the train platforms with a clipboard, smiling. In Israel, founded in 1948 as a refuge for those who had survived annihilation, the idea that Eichmann lived free was a stain on the conscience of a young nation. In the early 1950 seconds, fragments of information began to reach Israeli intelligence. A German journalist named Fritz Bauer passed rumors of a Mr. Klement living among the German expatriates in Buenos Aires. Others whispered of gatherings where former SS officers toasted the old days. But no solid proof emerged until 1957, when a half-blind Jewish immigrant in Argentina told his daughter's story to a local prosecutor. The girl had been dating a boy named Nick, who bragged that his father had been a big man in Germany during the war. When pressed, the father's name was said to be Eichmann. The information reached the Israeli embassy and, soon after, the desk of Mossad director Isser Harel. He read the report once, twice, then said only one sentence: "If it's true, we'll find him." Harel had built Mossad from scratch, an organization of fewer than 100 people in its early days, operating with ingenuity rather than resources. But this mission was different. It wasn't just about security or intelligence. It was about history itself. For the young state of Israel, still haunted by the ashes of Europe, bringing Eichmann to trial meant more than revenge. It meant reclaiming the narrative, showing the world and themselves that the Jewish people would no longer be passive victims of history. Thus began the most daring operation in Mossad's early history. The mission had one name: Operation Eichmann. The plan started with confirmation. Before Mossad could act, they needed absolute proof that Ricardo Klement was indeed Adolf Eichmann. 2 agents were sent to Argentina under civilian cover. They rented rooms in the same neighborhood, posing as tourists and businessmen. Their task was simple, but excruciating: observe, photograph, and confirm. For weeks, they watched the man leave his home at the same time every morning, take the same bus, return just after dusk. They noted his mannerisms, his posture, the way he checked over his shoulder. They photographed him from a distance, enlarging the images at night in their improvised darkroom. When the photos reached Tel Aviv, the analysts studied every line on his face, every scar, every shape of his ears, comparing them to wartime portraits. One evening, an agent watched as the man came home carrying flowers. His wife, still speaking German after all these years, called him Adolf. That was the moment the surveillance team stopped calling him the suspect. From then on, in every coded message, he was simply referred to as the target. Director Isser Harel decided the time had come. He personally flew to Buenos Aires under diplomatic cover, staying in a safe house with the operatives. It was there, in that small rented home with blackout curtains and a single phone line, that the details of Operation Eichmann were finalized. The mission was divided into 3 phases: capture, containment, and extraction. Each step had to be executed with absolute precision. Argentina had no extradition treaty with Israel, and any exposure could lead to international outrage or even the dissolution of Mossad itself. Harel's voice was calm but absolute. No blood, no noise, no mistakes. They studied Eichmann's route, like scientists dissecting an equation. Every evening, Bus 203 brought him from his factory job to the same intersection on Garibaldi Street. The stop was poorly lit, bordered by a field and a ditch perfect for an ambush. The team rehearsed endlessly, timing their movements down to the second. They practiced dragging a man into the car in less than 5 seconds. They memorized escape routes through the city's labyrinth of narrow roads. Still, the risk was unimaginable. Argentina's government was known to harbor ex-Nazis, and the local police were unpredictable. Any whisper of an Israeli operation could trigger arrests, or worse. But Harel was unwavering. "The time for hiding," he said, "has ended." The final order was given for May 11th, 1960. Each agent was handed a single phrase to memorize the confirmation code that would signal success. The team has gone for a walk. That night, as the sun sank over Buenos Aires, the operatives took their positions. The car engine idled softly. The air smelled faintly of diesel and rain. Somewhere down the street, the bus door opened. A man stepped off. The ghost had no idea he was walking into history. Buenos Aires. The nights were long and windless that May. The Mossad team had turned an ordinary rental house into a command post. Maps of the city were spread across the table, each street marked with lines of red pencil. Bus schedules, possible escape routes, patrol frequencies. Every move of Eichmann's life had been reduced to coordinates. For 2 weeks they followed him, always from a distance, never the same route twice, never the same car twice. One agent stood at the bus stop pretending to read a newspaper. Another waited with a broken-down car. A third would trail him home by foot, stopping to tie his shoes when Eichmann looked over his shoulder. Their patience was a science, their invisibility an art. Inside the safe house, they spoke quietly in Hebrew and German. Coffee cups were left half full, cigarettes burned to their ends. Each night they reviewed film rolls through magnifying lenses, studying every detail, the slope of Eichmann's nose, the curve of his ear, the way he carried his briefcase. One agent whispered, "It's him. It must be." But Harel demanded certainty. "We don't believe," he said. "We know." Outside, Buenos Aires was preparing for its 150th independence celebration. Parades filled the streets, crowds waved flags, and the city pulsed with distraction. For Mossad, it was the perfect cover. Peter Malkin wrote in his notebook that the hardest part wasn't the fear of failure, it was waiting. "You live among ghosts," he said. "Every sound feels like it might be the last before something happens." On the final night before the capture, the team rehearsed once more. Timing, position, words, every motion drilled until instinct replaced thought. There would be no guns unless necessary, no shouting, no visible struggle. The mission was not assassination, it was abduction. And as the sun sank below the horizon, the watchers became hunters. The date was the 11th of May, 1960. The air was heavy, the street dim. At 7:35 p.m., the bus appeared in the distance, the same number 203 they had been watching for weeks. Inside the Chevrolet, silence. Malkin watched through the windshield as the bus slowed. The doors opened. Commuters stepped down, one by one. Then came Eichmann, dark coat, hat pulled low, briefcase in hand, ordinary, forgettable. He crossed the road, alone. Malkin stepped out, pretending to fix a loose bumper. Another agent, standing beside the ditch, glanced up briefly the prearranged signal. Eichmann walked closer, footsteps steady on the gravel. Malkin whispered the code to his partner. "It's him." He approached Eichmann slowly and said in Spanish, "Un momentito, señor." Eichmann paused, startled. In that instant, Malkin lunged. His arm wrapped around the man's neck, dragging him backward toward the waiting car. Another agent grabbed his legs. The briefcase fell to the ground, papers scattering like frightened birds. The struggle lasted seconds, but to those in the car, it felt like an eternity. Eichmann gasped, tried to shout, but a hand covered his mouth. Malkin pressed harder. "Quiet," he hissed in German. "If you shout, you die." They shoved him into the back seat and threw a blanket over him. The car doors slammed shut. Tires screeched once, then silence returned. The street was empty again. For a moment, Malkin looked back through the rear window. The briefcase lay in the dirt, its contents fluttering in the night breeze, fragments of a false life, ending where it began. The team drove in silence through the back roads, avoiding the main avenues. No one spoke. No one dared to. The radio was off. Only the sound of the engine filled the air. When they finally stopped at the safe house, Eichmann was trembling. His glasses bent, a thin cut across his cheek. Malkin opened the door, removed the blindfold, and looked into his eyes. There was no rage in them, only confusion. The kind of confusion that came from a man who believed he had escaped history itself. Inside the small house at 4269 Chacabuco Street, Eichmann sat on a wooden chair under a single hanging bulb. His wrists were bound. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his breathing shallow but steady. The Mossad agents circled him quietly, each lost in the surreal reality of what stood before them. The man in the chair, thin, gray, unremarkable, had once sent trains of death across Europe with mathematical precision. One agent whispered, almost to himself, "This is the man who signed the orders?" Malkin nodded. "The man who made the trains run on time." They began questioning him in German. "Your name?" Silence. "Your real name?" He hesitated. Then, almost inaudibly, he said, "Ich bin Adolf Eichmann." The room fell still. No one moved. It was as if the air itself had stopped breathing. Malkin felt no satisfaction, no victory, only gravity, the weight of centuries pressing down in that single sentence. The others exchanged glances, not knowing whether to cry or curse. For 9 days, Eichmann was kept in the safe house under round-the-clock guard. The team rotated shifts, feeding him modest meals, keeping him calm but under control. They recorded his statements, verified details only Eichmann could know, the structure of SS departments, code names of officers, specific transport routes. Every answer confirmed what they already knew. Outside, life in Buenos Aires continued undisturbed. The world was celebrating, unaware that one of history's most wanted men was now a prisoner, hidden in plain sight. Meanwhile, diplomatic danger loomed. Argentina would never tolerate such an operation on its soil. If the authorities discovered the team, the embassy, and possibly Israel itself would face an international scandal. Harel decided they had no choice. Eichmann had to be smuggled out of the country. But the question was, how? Argentina's airports were under tight scrutiny. A private flight was impossible, and ships would take weeks. Then came the idea, audacious, almost absurd. In 10 days, the Israeli national airline, El Al, would send a delegation to Buenos Aires to celebrate Argentina's independence. The crew would include pilots, mechanics, and diplomats. Mossad would infiltrate that delegation. They would disguise Eichmann as a crew member, sedated, uniformed, carrying fake papers. The world would think Israel's plane was leaving with nothing but its citizens. In reality, it would be carrying a ghost. In the days before departure, the safe house became a pressure chamber. The agents barely slept. Every sound outside, footsteps, car engines, dogs barking, felt like danger. One of the guards confessed later that his hand never left his pistol, even in the bathroom. Eichmann, meanwhile, grew eerily calm. The first shock of capture had faded. He ate, answered questions, even attempted polite conversation. When asked if he understood why he was being taken to Israel, he said softly, "I obeyed orders. Others would have done the same." Those words hit the agents like poison. For them, many of whom had lost entire families in the camps, this was the face of denial itself. One evening, as Malkin handed him a meal, Eichmann said quietly, "You are a good man." Malkin looked at him for a long moment before answering, "No, I'm the man who caught you." On the 9th day, a storm broke over Buenos Aires. Thunder, rain, and the kind of wind that masked footsteps. It was the perfect night to move. Eichmann was given a sedative and dressed in an El Al uniform. His forged papers named him as Zeev Zikroni, a flight technician recovering from an accident. 2 agents flanked him, pretending to assist their injured colleague. At the airport, Mossad operatives had already prepared the paperwork, a stack of diplomatic documents signed by the Israeli ambassador himself. As they approached security, a guard asked for identification. One agent smiled, handed over the documents, and said, "He's still weak from the accident." The guard glanced at the sleeping man, shrugged, and stamped the passports. The sound of that stamp, dry, sharp, final, was the moment the impossible became real. Eichmann was loaded onto the El Al plane, placed in a reclining seat at the back. His pulse was steady, his breathing soft. Outside, rain fell across the tarmac, streaking the windows. The engines roared to life. As the plane lifted into the storm, no one on the ground realized that history was leaving with it. Malkin, sitting a few rows away, looked down at his hands, still trembling, still unable to accept what they had done. For years, he had imagined this moment as triumphant. But in that quiet cabin, filled with the hum of the engines and the sleeping captive, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like justice, finally catching up with time itself. Above the clouds, The hum of the engines was the only sound. The El Al plane cut through the darkness of the South Atlantic, heading east not toward Europe, but toward destiny. Inside, the cabin lights were dimmed. The crew sat quietly, pretending this was an ordinary diplomatic flight. But everyone on board knew the truth. In the back row, Adolf Eichmann slept under sedation, his head tilted slightly, his mouth half open. The man who once orchestrated the transport of millions now traveled as cargo, stripped of name, uniform, and power. Peter Malkin sat 2 rows behind him, staring through the small oval window. The night sky over the ocean looked endless, black waves below, stars above, a horizon without edges. For the first time in his life, Malkin thought about justice not as victory, but as burden. At 3 a.m., one of the agents whispered to him, "We did it. He's ours." Malkin nodded, but didn't answer. In his notebook, he scribbled only 2 words, "Never again." As dawn broke, the plane approached Israeli airspace. The pilots radioed ahead with coded confirmation. The package is secured. On the ground at Lod Airport, Mossad director Isser Harel stood waiting with a handful of officials. When the plane's wheels touched down, no applause erupted, only quiet relief. Eichmann was escorted off the aircraft under heavy guard, still wearing his El Al uniform. For a moment, the early light hit his face, pale, aging, human. He looked neither monstrous nor heroic, only exhausted. In that fragile dawn, justice had finally arrived home. But the storm that followed would be global. On the 11th of April, 1961, the world stopped to watch as Adolf Eichmann entered the courtroom in Jerusalem. Behind thick glass sat the ghost of an empire that had tried to erase an entire people. Cameras flashed, pens scratched, survivors held their breath. He wore a plain suit and steel-rimmed glasses. No uniform, no insignia. Only a nervous twitch in his hands betrayed the tension beneath his calm demeanor. Before him stood 3 judges, and behind them, a nation still haunted by unburied memory. The prosecutor, Gideon Hausner, began with words that would echo through history. "I am not standing alone. With me are 6 million accusers." The trial was not just about one man, it was about the machinery of evil, the banality of obedience, the moral abyss that ordinary humans could become. For the first time, Holocaust survivors told their stories to the world, stories of ghettos, gas chambers, trains that arrived without return. Their voices trembled, but their words were immortal. Eichmann's defense was chilling in its simplicity. "I was following orders." He claimed he was a cog in the machine, a bureaucrat, not a murderer. He spoke of duty, hierarchy, obedience, words that drained horror of emotion, as if genocide were merely paperwork. But the world saw through him. Every time a survivor pointed to the glass booth, every time a trembling witness described the sound of the trains, Eichmann's mask cracked. He looked away, adjusting his glasses, pretending to take notes. The irony was unbearable. A man who once sent millions to their deaths, now shielded by the very legal system he had denied his victims. The trial lasted 8 months. Over 100 witnesses testified. Millions watched on television the first global broadcast of a Holocaust trial. For the young generation of Israelis, many born after the war, it was the moment they understood what their parents had endured. For the world, it was an education in evil. In December 1961, the judges read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Crimes against humanity, crimes against the Jewish people, crimes of war. Eichmann showed no emotion. When asked for final words, he said, "I obeyed orders and must accept the consequences." At midnight on the 1st of June 1962, he was hanged in a small prison outside Tel Aviv. His ashes were scattered at sea, beyond Israel's waters, so that no piece of land could ever bear his memory. But his death was not the end. It was the beginning of a reckoning for Israel, for the world, and for Mossad itself. When news of Eichmann's execution spread, reactions were divided. Some celebrated, some questioned. Others simply fell silent. For survivors, it was a strange kind of closure. Justice, yes, but justice that came too late for the dead. In the streets of Tel Aviv, people lit candles. In Germany, newspapers debated the moral implications. In Argentina, the government protested the violation of its sovereignty, filing complaints to the United Nations, and in every capital of the world, diplomats whispered the same sentence: Israel has changed the rules. Indeed, it had. The capture of Eichmann redefined what justice meant in a world without precedent. Until that moment, crimes like his had been treated as history distant, unreachable. Mossad had shattered that illusion. They had proven that memory could be an instrument of action, and that time did not erase responsibility. Inside Mossad headquarters, Isser Harel spoke to his agents. "You have done something that will outlive all of us," he said. "But remember, we are not executioners. We are witnesses." For Mossad, Operation Eichmann became both triumph and warning. It proved that even the smallest intelligence service could move mountains through patience, precision, and moral conviction. Yet it also set a dangerous precedent. If justice could cross borders, so could vengeance. In the years that followed, Mossad would strike again in Rome, in Beirut, in Damascus, chasing the architects of terror, dismantling threats before they were born. But behind every mission was the ghost of Buenos Aires, reminding them that justice in the shadows is never clean. In classrooms, children studied the trial as part of their nation's story. In archives, scholars replayed Eichmann's voice, calm, emotionless, terrifying in its normality. The trial had given the world a language for evil, one not of monsters, but of men. One journalist wrote, "Eichmann taught us that evil does not scream, it speaks politely." And perhaps that was the deepest wound of all. Decades passed. The agents who had risked everything to capture Eichmann grew old, their names still secret to most of the world. Some wrote books under pseudonyms. Others never spoke of that night again. But all of them carried the same memory the moment the car door closed, and history was rewritten in the silence of an Argentine street. Peter Malkin would later say that he often dreamed of Eichmann not as a monster, but as a man brushing dust off his coat, standing on Garibaldi Street as if nothing had happened. "It's strange," he said. "I caught him once, but in my mind, I keep catching him again and again." Isser Harel retired quietly. He was hailed as a hero, but the success of Operation Eichmann weighed heavily on him. He feared that future generations might see the operation not as justice, but as license, a justification for any act done in the name of righteousness. "There is a line," he once wrote, "a line between justice and vengeance, and once you cross it, it never disappears." Within Israel, the capture and trial of Eichmann transformed the national psyche. It united a fractured people, survivors, soldiers, new immigrants, under a single truth: that their existence was not an accident of history, but a defiance of it. For the first time, Holocaust survivors spoke openly, no longer silent from shame. The trial had given them permission to speak, and the nation permission to listen. In the years that followed, Mossad grew into one of the most formidable intelligence agencies in the world. It would hunt down Nazi fugitives, intercept hostile networks, and protect the fragile state that had been born from ashes. But in its heart, there remained a paradox, that the very same mission that defined its greatness also defined its burden. The capture of Eichmann had proven that evil could be found even after 15 years of darkness. But it also proved that once you enter the shadows, you never truly return. For the agents, justice came at the price of peace. For the world, justice came at the price of illusion. No longer could anyone say, "It's over," because history, once awakened, never sleeps again. In one of his final interviews, Malkin was asked if he felt proud. He paused, looked at the floor, and said softly, "Proud, yes, but not happy. You can't be happy about catching a man like Eichmann. You can only be relieved that such a man no longer walks free." He then looked up and added, "When I closed that car door, I didn't just catch one man. I caught the century itself." The story of Operation Eichmann is not just about a mission or a spy network or even a trial. It is about the moment when humanity decided that forgetting was no longer an option. Eichmann's glass booth in the courtroom remains one of the most haunting images of the 20th century, not because it contained a monster, but because it contained a man who looked ordinary. It reminded the world that evil wears no horns, that it smiles, that it signs papers, that it rides the bus home at dusk. And that is why Mossad hunted him, not only to bring him to justice, but to show what justice truly means. Because in the end, Operation Eichmann was never just an operation. It was a message to time itself, that memory can cross oceans, that justice can outweigh silence, and that even the smallest nation on earth can summon the courage to face the darkest chapters of humanity. As one of the judges said at the verdict, Adolf Eichmann is not on trial alone. The idea that men can obey orders and remain innocent, that idea is on trial too. The verdict stands still. And in every act of justice since, in every pursuit of truth, in every whisper of never again, there is an echo of that night in Buenos Aires, when a handful of ordinary men reached into the shadows and pulled the past into the light.